learners. Today we are going to talk about factors that affect determination of prices. In the last session that we did together, we talked about pricing objectives and how our pricing objective set, what are the ways in which these differ over life cycle of the product, or the way in which they differ over different types of organizations. So today we are going to talk about factors that come into play when prices are being determined. In some cases you would also look at the same kind of content under price setting in practice. So today basically we are just going to talk about factors that impinge upon the determination of pricing. Now, as a result of going through this session, I expect all of you to be able to perform these things. You should be able to discuss the inputs that form the basis of price setting, what goes into the price setting decision. You should also be able to explain the factors and list them out in terms of how they determine prices. The two major factors that come into play in price determination are demand and supply for goods and services. So you should be able to describe what is the significance of demand and what is the significance of alternative supplies in pricing. While we talk about cost and the product itself and the set consumers of a given product as relatively specific to a company, there are external third parties that impact the price determination. These are people like competition, your suppliers and your intermediaries. You should be able to explain what is the role that these people play in your price determination. And you should also be able to comment upon the role that the consumer psychology plays in enabling a certain level of price. We do talk about price determination as being a relatively controllable variable within the control of the company. In the last session, when we were talking about marketing mix variables, we said that this is the most manageable of all P elements, that the company has a relative freedom in setting its prices. However, this choice is not unbounded. This is a bounded choice, and this choice that you have of setting your prices has two major limits. The floor of your decision is provided by the cost. No company can keep on pricing its product below the cost at which it is producing the goods. You need to cover, in order to survive, you need to cover your costs and you need to create a margin so that you can grow and you can have some returns on the investment that you have made. So for every price decision, the floor is given by the cost of producing goods and delivering goods. So this is the basic cost below which you would not be able to price your goods for long. You may do it for a very limited time when you are entering the market or you are trying to have some other objective of ousting the competition or whatever. So you could do it for a very limited time, but beyond a certain time you cannot do that. The ceiling of the pricing decision beyond which you cannot go is determined by the consumer's capacity to pay. What is it that your consumers can actually pay for that kind of product or those kind of goods? Beyond that, even if you price the product, there will be no takers for the product. So between these two ranges, you will have to price your product. Remember, for some products this could be a very wide range. For exclusive, innovative novelties in the market, you could have a very high aspirational value in the mind of the consumer, and the consumer can actually be willing to pay a large amount, and therefore your cost of production, willingness to pay a certain price by the consumer may be very high. So you have a large range of choices at which you can set your price. So, but for most products and services, it may not be a completely unbounded choice. So these are the two boundaries within which prices have to be set. An additional filter is also added by the competition. You cannot be too far out of the prevailing price except when you are creating a complete innovation or complete novelty in the market, then you are sort of beyond existing competition and you can charge whatever you want. But in cases of products which have got alternatives, for which there are other choices that are available to the consumers, your competition's prices become a frame of reference for your own consumers, and therefore you will have to look at what are the prevailing prices before you set a final level. Now, if you look at the determinants of pricing decision, there are several determinants. Some of them are related to the demand by the consumer, what kind of demand, what level of demand, and what is the way this demand is responsive to price changes. So, some factors are related to consumer demand. There are others which are related to the company's own costs and the cost of delivering goods. You may have different objectives. The subject matter of our session immediately preceding this session, where we were talking about pricing objectives. So, what were your objectives when you began initiating the price discussion? And again, an external variable is the regulatory factors or government policy. Government from time to time regulates the prices of certain goods and services. For example, telecom prices are regulated in this country. You also have prices of essential goods sometimes being regulated, cannot go beyond a certain price. We have also seen situations where pharmaceutical goods like valves that are used for the heart and angioplasty situations, the prices are now regulated, that even if you are buying, these are actually called stents. So, when you are buying stents from abroad, you cannot price them beyond a certain price and charge which are called usurious rates at which you can make huge profits. So, government tries to come in and regulate these things on humanitarian grounds and grounds of equity. So, let us look at different types of determinants. Let us first talk about determinants that are related to consumer demand. We need to have an idea what is the extent of demand of this product. How many people actually want this product and are active consumers of that product. You may have a certain degree of pricing freedom if there is a large number of people looking for your kind of product. The other factor that modifies this variable a little is what is the level of price sensitivity. Is this the kind of product where the responsiveness of demand to changes in price is very high. So, when the demand is very elastic, a small change in price can make huge changes in demand, then you need to be very careful about initiating and making pricing changes or setting the initial price at a level where you will maximize your demand, which also brings us back to what we studied in the slide on pricing objectives. Sometimes you price to get the maximum share of the market. So, depending upon what is your existing level of demand and how sensitive are your consumers to changes in prices. What is the price at which the goods are available otherwise? So, if you price it a little higher and also imbue it with a certain image of giving something extra for that extra price, your demand may not really be affected. You have in your sessions on product heard about product differentiation. So, if you differentiate your product a little, you may be able to get away with some price hikes which the consumer may be willing to pay because he believes that he is getting extra value. So, this is the variable that has got a huge impact on pricing decisions. You cannot be oblivious to the kind of demand you have and the complexion of demand you have before you sit down and start pricing your products. So, if a product enjoys a huge demand, the producers have a slight degree of flexibility in setting prices at a level that they think will bring in desired exchanges. The second determinant, which is again related to demand, is the availability of substitutes. How many alternative choices do consumers have um, for this very product. Let's talk about brands of toothpaste. If you're talking about relatively undifferentiated, everyday kind of freshness based toothpaste, there are so many variables that are available. There are so many variants of this product that are available in the market. So if a certain company starts upping its price too often, consumers may shift because there are other alternatives, maybe equally good alternatives, sometimes better alternatives available at similar prices. So they may want to shift. There are alternative options. I mean, substitutes and options are slightly different in the sense that consumers may have alternative modes of consumption that they start using. Petrol prices getting too high, people may actually start pooling cars, or they may start using public transport like metro. So what are the alternative options of that kind of consumption that people may start using? When coffee becomes very expensive, people start using chicory blends instead of coffee. So that's an alternative consumption which gives people similar, not exactly identical, but similar kind of satisfaction. So what are the alternative options? What is the customer's resistance to change? If you are bringing in a new product, the consumers are already buying your competitor's product and they are fairly used to that product. In order to initiate a change of preference, you may have to create a price point that is attractive for people to buy. So get them to at least bite or take the bait and buy your product once, so that they get exposed to your product and start buying. So sometimes if the consumers are too resistant to change, you may have to use price as a tool to break that resistance. Interestingly, because indicators of quality are not easily available, consumers have a tendency of using high prices as a surrogate indicator of quality. So this is something that marketers weigh very carefully when they are creating what is called specialty items, novelty item, luxury goods, or exclusive products. The high price is sometimes kept so high that it creates a non-mass market specialty product kind of an image, and people believe that's a high quality product. Please remember, high prices may be related to a higher level of quality, but more often than not, the price differential is not directly translatable into a quality differential. So when consumers look at these goods and services, they find that a higher price product is better quality. But is it, if the price is 50% high, is the quality also 50% or more better, which is something that is hardly ever verifiable. So these price quality perceptions can be created. So sometimes high prices are preferred prices. Examples are some hospitality products, certain clubs, apparel, designer wear. All of these, a certain price perception is used to create a quality image. Sometimes you may find that if you raise the price in small steps, consumers sometimes do not perceive this upward price revision, and therefore marketers sometimes keep a certain base price and then raise it in very, very small steps, so that this is below the level of perception of an average customer who does not realize that the price has been raised and keeps on buying. So a common activity that is sometimes followed is the goods have been priced for a long time at $69.99, and sometime later it would not be $71.99, it would straight away go to $79.99. So you remember an odd price, and that price change is sometimes not perceived by the customer, but it has added a revenue stream to the manufacturer. Okay. This is one set of factors. The other set of factors is related to your internal variable of cost. What is the cost structure of the firm? Do you have a large fixed cost and a small variable cost component? Do you have a large variable cost component? Therefore, with the level of production, where you go into mass production, your costs per product actually come down to a great extent. Then your freedom of pricing becomes very, very different, because you can leverage this this cost per unit going down with your with your economies of scale. You also need to understand very clearly what is the nature and operation of my costs. If you add a product line, what are the additional costs that you are adding, and therefore what is the way in which, because the basic production setup being the same, additional costs of producing that variant by changing certain components of the product or certain attributes of the product. Now, those additional costs will be dependent upon what is the total demand for that variant, and as the demand grows, your total cost would come down. What is the interplay of these costs? You need to understand very clearly the nature of the costs and how do these costs operate. You also need to have very clear understanding of how do costs have interrelationship. For example, your cost of distribution and your level of service. There are what is called interesting set-offs between costs. If you use a faster mode of transportation to take your goods to your consumers, your inventory costs may come down, but your transportation costs will go up, and the degree to which it goes up may actually offset your reduction in inventory costs. So, this interplay of costs and how they are interrelated to each other are important to understand, because they will determine the way in which your costs will move. And we just discussed that your total cost actually forms the floor below which you cannot go. So, you need to have an idea of the total cost, you need to have an idea of the cost behavior, and you need to also understand very clearly how costs have a way of getting set off against each other, or have what is called interrelationships. We just talked about inventory and transportation as an example, and there are other examples like that. You may be able to sell far more by advertising to a different set of, in a different market or different set, but the other costs of developing demand in that market may also become operative. So, understanding of these costs and how do they affect you in the short run and in the long run is important. Sometimes companies have found it very profitable not to do all the things themselves. For example, part of their production they may outsource to other agencies who may give them a more efficient cost structure. Therefore, you outsource some components to others and then do what is called the balance manufacturing yourself or assembling yourself and selling it. A good example is the automotive sector. A large number of parts are actually manufactured by other people who specialize only in that component. So, OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, who do all of this and then supply it to the manufacturers. There are cars where the steering wheel is outsourced to one OEM supplier, the non-essential parts like the furnishings and all are produced by something else. Obviously, the audiovisual companies would be producing the AV equipment for the car and so on, and all of these. So, companies sometimes therefore find that operating on models like outsourcing may give them a more efficient cost model and may actually affect the cost on which you can afford to sell. I mean, the cost at which you can profitably operate in the market. So, this is again one of the approaches that is being utilized increasingly in the market today. One of the major determinants, in fact, one of the primary determinants of your pricing decision is what are the company objectives. When you start functioning in the market, you have certain objectives that you are looking for from your pricing function. In fact, the question to answer is, what do I want my pricing to do for me? If you are in a stage where you are struggling to find a place in the market and you're trying to find a foothold, the objectives of your pricing may actually be just to survive. So you operate on really thin margins and just try to keep your head above water in the hope that if enough number of customers keep on buying your product, you may be able to survive this difficult patch, multiply your demand, and then go into a growth phase where you can breathe a little easier. If your objective is growth, then again you begin with, we talked about this in the last session, that you begin with a small price margin and then you keep on increasing your margins as your demand multiplies. If your objective is market entry, that you can have two kinds of pricing approaches. One is if your product is a novelty, it's never been seen in the market, it has got a hugely distinctive advantage which is perishable over time, then you choose what is called a skimming the cream kind of market entry strategy, and you take whatever the market can bear at a point in time, and gradually as the product loses its distinctiveness and becomes more common, you bring the prices down. Examples are new models of your iPhone or new models of any technologically superior product that comes to the market. For example, digital cameras when they first came in, internet TV when it first comes in, the price is very high, and as it becomes more commonplace, as more competition comes in, there are more variants that become available, the prices become more reasonable. The other approach where you are trying to enter a competitive market or trying to enter a market where the consumer demand is not very vibrant, you keep a small price, you keep a very, very low price and get an entry into the market by penetrating the market. That is called penetrative pricing policy. So those are some of the objectives while you are doing market entry. So you try to use the low price to break down people's resistance to buy, in the hope that when people start using the product that they will like it so much. I still remember when I was a student, the Maggi noodles had made its entry into the marketplace and the price was 2.90 rupees. Nobody would believe it now. So it was such a low price that the risk of experimentation was so low, and people found that as they quite enjoyed the product, and they were the prices were raised in very, very small volume, very, very small steps, to the extent that for a very long time the product was available at 5 rupees, years later. So this is how the product makes an entry into the market, either by skimming or by penetrating the market. Sometimes your market objectives are to oust the competition. Because you've been operating at a certain scale and because you have a certain volume of demand and you have maybe your order book looks good, you try to price your product at which it would create entry barriers for new competition to come in, or it would make it so unviable economically for the competition to survive that one by one the weaker competitors start leaving the market. You have the situation of telecom pricing in India, there are other kinds of, and some of them are actually on the boundary of strictly legal practices, but ousting competition is again a marketing objective that is followed. A related pricing objective is loss leader marketing, where you price your product below cost. When this happens when you have a fairly complete product line. There are some products that are frequently used product. You keep the price of the frequently used product low, that the customer comes in and he gets exposed to your remaining product line and starts experimenting with that and buying that. So this product is like a hook, it brings the customer in, and then the customer gets exposed to the other products and this is called loss leader pricing. Apart from the cost factors and the demand factors, there are certain other factors like what are the competitive practices and what are the responses of the anticipated response of the competition when you keep your price at a certain level. If you keep your prices very low and the entire competition reacts by reducing their prices also, nobody really gains, because the customers still get distributed because there's no real difference between, as far as the price is concerned, no real difference between the various producers, and people get redistributed between the different competitors. What happens is that the whole industry is left with lower price returns because everyone has reacted and reduced the prices. So you need to be careful about evaluating what is likely to be my competitor's response if I keep a very low price. If I keep a very high price, or if I raise my prices suddenly and nobody responds, then there is a danger that some of my customers can actually go to my nearest competitor because there is such a difference between. So, one of the determinant of your pricing decision is also what is the price at which my competitor is selling. Therefore, can I afford to be radically different? Can I afford to be very high? Can I afford to be really very low? You need to evaluate those choices, because if you are pricing your product fairly higher than the competitor's price, you need to give a commensurate value to the customer and distinguish your product significantly and communicate that difference very effectively, so that the consumer knows that this price difference is actually justified. Otherwise you may be losing out to your competitors. Again, if you make a price change and the competitors respond very fast, then your advantage that you are seeking in your price change actually gets lost. So these are variables that need to be evaluated before you initiate a price change, or before you initially set your price, because you need to be aware of what are the charging for the same value that you are offering to the market. An external influence is that government policy. What is the government's policy regarding electricity prices, regarding commodity prices, regarding prices of essential goods, and they come out with regulations from time to time, or directives from time to time, and you need to be responsive to those. Regulatory regime in certain sectors, the regulatory regime is fairly strict. Examples are prices of services. There are things like school fees, and there are various state governments come out with a regulation that the school fees cannot go beyond a certain level, and so on. So these regulatory requirements need to be fulfilled. You really have a choice if you want to operate in a particular market which is within regulatory regime. You have to follow those. The last variable in other variables is industry practices. How does the industry generally price those? So there are prevailing practices in various kinds of industries. There are certain industries which are monopolistic or have oligopolistic pricing practices. You would have studied this in your microeconomics. So in oligopoly, you really have too much of pricing choice, because there is a king demand curve, and therefore industry practices in terms of is there a prevailing price charging practice? Is there and a sort of a monopolistic pricing? Does your industry belong to a category where oligopolistic prices are in play? Then you don't really have too much of a freedom in pricing your products. So what we have tried to cover in this session is what are the variables that impact your pricing decisions. I would like you to, as you leave this session, do a small practice exercise. That practice exercise is just look at one particular product. It could be a toothpaste, it could be a shampoo, it could be perfumes, it could be deodorants and so on. And look at the entire range of prices over which products in this category are available. Try to understand what could have been the factors behind keeping that. So look at the highest price product, the medium range and the lowest range product. Try to relate them to companies' objectives of pricing objectives, try to relate them to the kind of demand and try to relate them to competitive practices. I'm sure you would have a very interesting time in comparing some of these. Thank you very much for your attention.